Okay, so this video is meant to be watched before you start the 11 or 12 or 13 videos that are in the Personalized Bobblehead Project. And it's just meant to correct a couple of things and show a couple of examples of how some things in the video aren't quite perfect and things that you should consider. The first one is the size. The height that I mentioned in the video is like 5 inches tall for your prints, which is okay, but at times I make the body 5 inches. Your total print should really only be about 4.5 inches tall. And if you're going to put it on a 1/2 inch base, then your body's only going to be 4 inches tall. So if this is an inch, this is going to be 4 inches, at most. This is an inch, maybe 3.5 inches. I would really suggest if that's an inch, which is big, I would make this 4 and make it a total of 5. But you really don't want to get outside of 5 inches. And then your head, if you look at mine, it's enormous. I made my head somewhere in the looks like 3 inches tall. It's just too big. So it really should be closer to 2.5. That's more the appropriate size. So hopefully you'll make that change and that'll come out better. You can see Michael did his head is way too small, so if you look at the two of them side by side, his is too small, and he must have had a problem with his scaling, but that's wrong. So that's all of that. Now this, if you notice, my body's only 4.5 inches, is only the same as this, 4.5 inches tall, but I had to make that smaller to fit on my plate, which is not good. Some of the other things to pay attention to is that when you have objects in your scan that are really thin, like for example, Cooper has that barbell going across. It's fine, it came out okay, but the problem's going to be that at the end of all this, we have to crack all this support material off. It's going to go really ugly when he tries to crack that off and not try to break that bar. To be honest with you, it's probably pretty likely it's going to break in places. So when you make your prints and you have objects that are thin like that, on Inventor or in Meshmixer, wherever you're making it, purposely make them oversized. Yes, they won't look great. It won't look exactly like the exact diameter of a barbell should be, but it'll hold up to you cracking all the support material off, and you'd rather have something representing what you're trying to accomplish than nothing. You can see Michael's going to have a similar problem. He's got ski poles buried inside of all of this. This is all mostly going to get cracked away, and he's going to have a really difficult time doing that. Another thing we should talk about is your scans themselves. If you make big, complicated scans like mine is, and I made this purposely, just use it as an example, things can go bad. So at some point, one, it's enormous, which is way too big. This took 17 hours and 15 minutes to print. Your average one like this one is going to take between 4 and 6 hours, maybe a little less. But so here's my really big print. Now you'll notice it went overnight, and at some point during the night, the back of my chair got cut off, and it didn't quite, something skipped or broke or whatever happened, and so it all printed out a mess like this. So I'm going to lose the back of my chair. It's not going to exist. I'll pull all that off, and that's essentially what the back of my chair is going to look like. I can live with that. The problem we ran into is that if you look at my head, when that happened, the printer must have skipped or something crazy, because look, there's an entire line through my head. If you've ever seen the movie Hannibal or whatever, with Red Dragon, it was Hannibal, where he does that thing where he cuts the top of his head off. That's what it looks like, and that's really not what we're going for. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of glad that it happened, because it'll be a forever good little example that we can show kids of why you shouldn't have big, immense, complicated prints. They should be smaller like Cooper's and Michael's is over here. The last thing is to take a look at the lettering. I mentioned how the lettering is easier to deal with, and I don't know how well you'll see this, but you can see my lettering, which I put out at an angle, came out really nicely. You can see it. It says Mr. Duff, Technology Teacher. It's really easy to read. Cooper's, and this was something that he didn't do it wrong. This is how we did it back then. His says Cooper Willis something underneath all of that, because the letters came straight off the object. It had to build support material. Taking that support material off is really almost impossibly difficult. We've tried it in the past and it hasn't turned out great. I have another one here. Oh, that one's at an angle. I can show you this one. This was one of the first ones we ever did. It's Kristen Schaefer, and we spent quite a bit of time trying to scrape hers off. And again, it's blue, it's a different color, it might be hard to see, but you really can't read it. It's supposed to say Kristen Schaefer JV All-Star, and you really can't read it very well. So it's the reason that you have to do it at an angle. You could also do it straight up. Don't know how much straight up is. The idea is to walk over to it and read it, and so you don't want to have to put your head over the top and be able to read it. So I wouldn't surprise me if there's another one of these videos, another like before you do everything else, consider these things. But all the stuff we just talked about, realize there are some mistakes in the videos and that to pay attention to these things and to set some things up that are going to matter. Like the thickness of the bar is a big one. When you have thin stuff, make it thicker. So if you have any questions, obviously come up and ask. Otherwise, good luck. Okay, so this is the video for how to remove support material. After your print has printed, it's going to have all this extra material on it that was used to hold up the print as it was printing. So like for example, the first thing it does is it prints a splotch on the bottom. It's on both prints. The nice part about that is it is probably the easiest thing to take off. So all you really do is kind of, and what I would suggest is rather than just pulling it off like a Band-Aid in one spot, crack around the edges and make sure you've got it in a good spot so you get some good leverage on it, and then take it the rest of the way off, because if you don't, it can get cracked and you end up taking more than maybe you thought. So you'll notice my head must not have been laying flat. It looks like my goatee was touching the ground, and so it didn't lay flat, so it printed support material under my head, which is unfortunate because we're going to have to take all of that off, and we'll show you how to do that later. We're going to use the Dremel for that. There are some not very smooth parts. There's a couple of parts where it's just the printer messed up. I don't know if you can see that well, but that's going to need to get sanded. We'll show you how to do that. So most of it, whatever you can pick off without breaking anything, you should do that. And then upgrade to the hand tools, and then after the hand tools, then's when you want to get into the Dremels. Much of it you can do by hand because you're going to have more control over what comes off. Now, most of the stuff that's on mine is going to come off relatively easy. I don't have to worry about breaking things. Like we talked about with Cooper's, when he takes his off, he's going to have a hard time breaking this because we don't want to break that barbell. So he's really going to have to support that and break at the same time. It's going to be difficult. We don't have a lot of those situations with the desk and with Abby's print, but when we do, we'll make an effort to show you how to do that. So the head, right off the rip, is in pretty good shape. All of this, unfortunately, we're going to have to use the Dremel to do that. So if I come to the desk, I'm going to start working on this splotch. Now, you might see me pause in and out. So like this is, I told you to go around and pull in little places. It might not let me do that. And if it doesn't let me do that, then I might fight with it off screen here so you're not watching me fight. But that's actually going pretty well. Some of the stuff's coming decent. Sometimes you gotta just kind of wait and see. That's coming off okay. Some splotches will, some splotches won't. Usually depends on how flat your base is. Like if you have a big square, like flat base, then lots of times that splotch doesn't want to come off very easy. This one so far is pretty good. If you notice, it's a desk, and underneath the desk is hollow. So in all of those hollow spots, it prints all the support material which has to come out. We actually got lucky, it left this big open area, which is nice because that's an area that we won't have to. It must have been able to bridge that distance diagonally so we could leave that open. But all the rest of it has to come out. Like if you look, there are those wheels and base buried inside of all this, which is going to be very difficult to chip away without breaking the base to the chair off and all that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of work around with our hand here, and whatever will come off easy, we'll take off easily. So I'm going to go around and do some of that, and then when I come back, I'll show you the next steps in getting at a little more aggressive with it and how to use some tools and how to do that. So I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, so we got a bunch of material off, maybe as much as we can get off by picking. One of the things, and I'll mention it probably more than once, is to be careful is that as you're pulling on something, lots of times you're leveraging your hands or your tools up against something else. To be really careful, like for example, I've already started to disconnect the bottom of the, if you can see that, the bottom of the desk from the top. Those should be attached. And it's just from me leaning up and prying on stuff. It's really hard to do, but it's something you have to be conscious of, to be careful of. Once you're done with that, you can start to upgrade to some of the hand tools that are over here. I think the best way is to just get in between stuff and kind of twist and turn and just start separating and getting a little bit of friction out of the way so that you don't get in rough shape. So again, I'm kind of picking at stuff. So you can work around and do that. You've also got this X-Acto knife, which is here, which you can use, but once you get into some of the knives, it's important that you put gloves on to protect your hands. Same thing with the Dremel. There's one good pair here that's small, and the other two pairs are way too big, but they're here. So you can put your gloves on and you can start to go in and pick away at whatever you can get. There's also a pair of snips, which you can use in small spaces. So like if I want to be careful not to break that wheel, I could potentially do it with snips. And I just broke that wheel. So that's one thing. And then I'll take that wheel and I'll show you a way where you can kind of glue that stuff back on later. You can also use this small set of pliers to kind of pull it away. Make sure that as you're working, we should have mentioned this right in the beginning, that you are wearing safety glasses because stuff can start to pick and pry and pop, and as you hit it, it can flick up and get you right in the head. So I'm going to work on some of this prying off to the side, and I'll come back to you when it's time to use the Dremel. So here we go. Okay, so I went away and I did as much cracking as I can do, and I kind of warned you that the more you crack, you got to be really careful because stuff's separated. When I had that problem, you'll notice that it's right at that waistline of my body. So like the top of my head and that cut are right in the same spot. So it cut right through here, and it made this joint really, really weak. It's part of the reason that this is separated and loose. We have some techniques to fix all of this. So if you notice, my legs and my seat and all that are separated from my body, which I don't totally hate because it's going to make it a whole lot easier to chip off of here. But nonetheless, we do have to finish chipping it off. As I get into my legs and under my chair, that's when things start to get a little sketchy. So what we're going to do is I want to make sure my glasses are on, put my gloves on, and we have our Dremel here. The way the Dremel works is there's a little silver pin here. And so if you push in on that pin and you rotate this collar, eventually it will catch, and then you can turn and you can slide this out. When you're ready to put it back in, you can tighten the collar that way. If your tool, so if these things break, these little sanding discs, these grinding wheels break, what you can do is there is a little wrench that's here and looks like that. You can take the bottom of it, put it into this screw and turn and unscrew that completely. And that will allow this disc to come off, and then you can put a new piece on from over here. I'm not going to waste our time doing that, but now I'm going to retighten it, put it back on there. I'm going to slide it into this collar. I'm going to push the button down, and I'm going to turn until it catches. There it goes. Turn it in, and now that's in good shape. So put my other glove on, and all I'm going to do is try to create some relief cuts, some ways that I can get into this to help me crack it better. Because now I'm to the point where it just won't come off. I've got these really long lines that go all the way back, and they're just too far. So I'm going to try to find some ways to make this a little easier on myself. So I'm going to turn the Dremel on. There's a little blue switch here to go from a 0 to a 1. And I'm just going to cut into this in some places. One of the things you want to be careful of is you know, this can do too good of a job. It can start jumping around on you. Lots of times it helps to hold it down so it doesn't cut things that you do want. I'm going to put a couple of cuts in here. To alleviate some stress. Definitely some back here since there's nothing in my way here. Okay, and so we'll see if that helps me get a little more off. So then I can take my little X-Acto blade here and just start prying again, starting to find places that'll let you pop off what you need to pop off. So I don't know if any of that worked or not. We'll have to see. Looks like some of this should come, at least a little. There we go, that came off because of those cuts. So you really just have to keep working the tools in to get them off. Some of the other stuff you can do, again, being careful, is I'll come back. We can sand off some of our weak spots. So I'm going to keep cutting away at this, prying away, and then when I get it all taken apart, I will bring it back over, we'll take a look at it, and then you'll see. One of the other things, too, is that with this desk, again, I didn't make the desk, but there is this cabinet that sits underneath here, which we want to stay. I'm going to leave this support material because it's doing a good job of supporting it. I'm afraid if I take that support material out, that the cabinet won't be supported enough and it'll just fall right away. You're never going to see it. It's going to sit on the desk like that, so I think that's a good way to do it. Also, the monitor has this, you know, little area underneath here, and the monitor is so kind of fragile that I'm definitely going to use the Dremel to do that. Maybe I'll take 2 seconds and I'll show you how. But I'm going to make this cut just underneath the monitor. Hopefully that's going to free me up enough to get that to come off. And so I'm going to go off to the side and try to pry that away. I may have to hit this at the bottom also. The problem with cuts like this is it's hard to get in there like you want to. The tool itself gets in the way. So that's going to take some playing around too. So I'll play with that stuff. I'll come back, and hopefully the next time I talk to you, I will have all of this cleaned up in 2 different pieces, and then we'll talk about how to sand away some of the like imperfections. So we'll be back in a little bit. Okay, so I probably just spent a half an hour or so trying to remove material from the bottom, and as I mentioned, it's really hard. And you saw that whole labyrinth I had underneath the bottom of this. Well, while trying to take all of this off, the entire base of the chair broke off, and it really didn't print very well. So you can see it's almost like see-through on the legs. It just didn't print it right, and so it made it really, really weak inside of this labyrinth of really strong support material. It's a good example of how some of those things can go bad, and how you can run into problems. Now I'm left with all these extra little pieces that need to come off. And again, you can keep working them with different objects. The one I want to work with them first is I'm going to take this off and I'm going to put a sander on here. So if you go inside of here, there should be a sanding disc like this on a different post. We'll screw that on and I'll show you the next thing. If you notice, this sanding disc is loose. It's coming off. What happens is you have to screw down this screw that I was telling you about on the other one, and what that'll do is it'll expand the rubber gasket inside, and it'll hold that sanding disc in place. So as I screw in this little screw, it makes that much harder to come off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this sanding wheel and I'm going to go up and down all of this stuff, taking material off, trying to sand it down as smooth as I can without making an absolute mess, and hopefully without taking off any other parts. So we'll do a little bit of that. I'll show you what that looks like, and then I'll work on it behind the scenes, and we'll come back. So you want to make sure you keep the disc moving. Don't leave it in one place too long, or you'll start to melt the plastic rather than sand it away. So try to always keep it moving, not to just hammer on one place over and over. Also, be very conscious not to go too far into the material, because the object is hollow. It's all honeycomb inside of there. You don't want to be able to see into your object. Like if I keep sanding into this seat, you know, you're going to see not straight plastic. You're going to see kind of a mess. So also, see, if you end up using the tip of that, some of that rubber gasket can rub off onto your object, and you don't want that either. So keep sanding that down. I'm going to do that there. I'm definitely going to do that for the bottom of my head. We talked about how that's not right. So I'm going to sit here and sand away at this till I get it down to where I want it to be. If I've got a mess in there, I can take this inside the neck hole and sand that out to clean all that up. I could also take this, and I've got some imperfections on my head. I can very lightly remove some of those so that looks a little bit better. Again, the more that you take off, the more that you sand, the less natural it's going to look, and that's obviously not our goal. So I will work on this for a while. I'll come back and I'll show you how that turned out. Okay, so I'm relatively well sanded here. We went through and tried to make things as smooth. Looks like I missed a spot there. I'll put the sanding disc and clean that up. But for the most part, we are pretty well sanded. I've got my head, I've got my desk, and now I have my unfortunately separated legs. So what I'm going to do is I have hot glue here, and I'm going to go and I'm going to put as much of it on here as possible, as quickly as possible, hopefully, and then try to glue the two together to hold themselves in place. I'm not sure my hot glue stick here was hot enough at the time. because it's not really coming out as quickly as I would like it to. I'll give that a shot, see where it goes, but I'm not optimistic. Maybe it's just enough. So we'll hold that in place, and it is hot glue, and it does take a little time to dry. So I would really suggest not giving up on this early and letting it sit and sit and sit and really make sure that it's dry, especially with the little bit that I got on. When I come back, I'll show you how to attach the head to the body. Okay, so we're going to work on attaching our head to our body so we end up with our full bobblehead experience here. You're going to want to work on the head first. That's the most important thing. You've got a long, most likely a long spring here that needs to be cut down to size. If I dip this in my head and pull my fingers out, it should give me the length. Now if you scaled everything properly, it should come out right. And if you remember, we went into the body an inch, and if I hold it up to my ruler, you know, we're in pretty good shape for an inch. So I know it's going to be however deep it goes into my head, so I'll put my finger here. I'll measure that distance, and that's about 3/4 of an inch. So I want to cut my spring to approximately 1 3/4 inches. I'm going to use these little metal snips here, which can be a little difficult to get into these tight spirals, but should be okay. Kind of wedge it in there and clip, and I just missed it. There it goes. Pinch that out. We'll just give it a little bit of a test run here, make sure we're going to be okay. And that's probably a little long, but at this point, a little long is not the end of the world. So what we're going to do now is we are going to fill like 2/3 of the head cavity with hot glue. Which hopefully at this point our hot glue gun is nice and heated up, because you don't want to wait very long, because you want to make sure you have, you know, a lot of liquid space to be able to stick that spring into. So when we are, we're in good shape. So then I'm going to take my spring that I just cut, wherever that ended up, since I really don't know, and I really do need it right this second. Alright, we can't seem to find it, so we are very quickly going to cut ourselves another one. Right at about there. Oh, there it is, it's in our neck. Sorry, found it. So now we're going to stick it inside of the head here, and actually, as that glue settled, it fell down a little farther, so I'm going to put just a little bit more in. But you definitely don't want to fill it all the way. And I'm going to set my spring in here. You want to make sure that when your spring is coming out of your head that it's not pitched, that it's going straight up and down. And if you let it sit there over time, it'll move. So hold it for a really long time. Even if you feel like it's cooled off, it probably isn't on the inside. So really go through a strong effort to make sure that's pointed straight up and down the whole time. If you're a girl and you have hair, you may want to angle your spring for a while. You may want your spring to pitch to offset the unbalanced head that you have by the extra ponytail or hair that you have hanging off the back. So that is also a possibility. So when this dries and I'm ready to attach it to the body, I will come back, but until then, we'll see in a little bit. Okay, so my spring is set well in my head. I let it sit here for quite a while and dry. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick it into my neck and have it sit there and bobble. Now, the reason we left a little bit of space between the glue and the top of the thing is we want to make sure we have some spring left. We don't want to fill either cavity all the way. We want some flexibility in that spring. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this down, and I do want to see a little bit of spring left. Now, my head is enormous. It's really heavy. So I'm going to take a little bit off the bottom of this spring so that it'll set in a little bit deeper and have a little bit more support. I'm going to take another couple of clips off, and I'm going to put that in there, and so when it's ready to go, it should bobble pretty nicely once it's held. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to attach this head to this body. I'm actually going to set it up to print one more time, and I'm going to reprint my head. I'm going to print it a little bit smaller like I should have originally at like 2.5 inches. And I'm going to set it on my body. So I'm going to redo this, and you may or may not see the final version of this because I'm finishing up Abby printing now, and we're going to go work on her in the background. When I come back, you should see some version of this, my head sitting here and Abby's body being completely done. And that'll kind of finish up the video, so hopefully you've enjoyed it, but we'll come back and talk in a few minutes. So Abby is done being printed, and I said when we came back I was going to go right to right to showing you the finished product, but I was sitting here working, and I did find another scraping tool, which I think is important to know that we have. And I was telling you that these splotches can be tough to get off. So this is an example of one of those, and really what you have to do is find a toe hole in someplace and then just really small direct cracks to try to get it off. It's really, when it's a flat base like this, and it should be a flat base, but it can be difficult. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to work on that, and I'll show you that when it comes back off. There's a chance I'll have to do some sanding on this piece as well. Sorry, I was kind of out of screen there. But you see I'm very slowly getting it off, and so we'll see how that goes. But I'll be back in a little bit to, I also want to show you when I come back how we're going to deal with the bottom of this head is all gummed up with material as well. So we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I told you we would look at, we got our base done. It actually came off really pretty quickly after I let you go there. Just working it in real slowly. You would not have gotten it going around the outside edges and trying to crack it. It was the only real way to do it. So I told you we'd come back, and I've got most of Abby's support material off her head, but you see the hole is all gummed up. So there's a tool for this, but what I would suggest doing first is sticking something in there and trying to kind of bore as much of it out as possible before you get into the Dremel, just because the less you have to sand out of there, the better. It gets into kind of like a plasticky mess. So like I use that, I'm gonna stick the screwdriver in there and just kind of turn on it and see how much of it you can crack out before you have to get the Dremel going. Once you've decided you've cracked out as much as you can turn this tool off and put on the well, if it'll fit, you can use one of these sanding discs, but some of the holes are too small. So there is this ceramic one too, which if you're going to use very sparingly, but it is an option, so turn it in, because the problem with the ceramic ones is that they just get gummed up with plastic. They're not really meant for this, but they'll work. So we're going to turn this on here, and all I'm going to do is stick that in the hole and kind of let that turn out as much of the plastic as we can. Again, don't leave it in there long, or it'll melt, which we don't want to do too much of. I'm in pretty good shape there, though. I think that is about as deep as I need to be. So from there, I'm going to fill her head full of glue, put her spring on, put it into her neck, and I'll show you how that came out in a few minutes. Okay, so here we are. This is kind of our final. I just took my head, my still broken head, and I put it on top of my body. And I mentioned how the heads are too big, and I think you can really see the problem now. It won't even hold up on the spring. It's so large. So the one that's printing now is 2.5 inches, and that's going to make it a big difference. You're not going to get to see that in the video, but I think you get the point. So if we hold that up and take a look, give you a little bit of an angle, that's kind of the finished product there. That looks pretty decent. And then my daughter came out good, and I scaled her down before I printed it, so it wasn't those original dimensions. You know, she's, whatever it is, 3.5, 4 inches tall, her head is 2.5 inches, and that came out a lot better. So make sure that, you're watching this at the end, but make sure you use those dimensions at the end, and I think you'll be a lot happier. So hopefully you enjoyed the videos. I look forward to seeing what cool ideas you come up with. If you have any questions, obviously come up and ask, but this is kind of the finale. So good luck, and we'll talk to you soon.